devastation caused by the nuclear accident at Chernobyl is well known. But the full story of the massive effort to contain the disaster has never been told. More than 500,000 Soviet men and women risked everything, and thousands ultimately sacrificed their lives in a desperate struggle to prevent a far greater catastrophe. A second explosion, 10 times more powerful than Hiroshima, that could have wiped out half of Europe. This is the heroic and tragic story of the battle. 2 men died that night. 28 more will follow in the next few months. They are the first victims of Chernobyl. By early morning, the clouds are already being contaminated by the radioactive column rising 3,000 feet into the sky. Igor Kostin was a photographer with the news agency Novosti. When a friend and a helicopter pilot offers to fly him over Chernobyl that morning, all Kostin knows is that something happened at the plant during the night. He is the first journalist to witness the gaping hole. The thin, translucent smoke he sees rising from the ruins is in fact highly radioactive. Kostin is one of the few Chernobyl reporters on the scene in the early hours of the accident to have survived serious exposure to radiation. This is the first picture ever taken of the breach. The crisis continues to grow. At the bottom of the destroyed reactor, 1,200 tons of white-hot magma continue to burn at over 5,000 degrees, sending radioactive gas and dust into the atmosphere. All of Europe is at the mercy of the winds. On the third day of the crisis, Soviet General Nikolai Antochkin leads a fleet of 80 helicopters sent from Moscow to fight the blaze and put the fire out. In those days, radioactivity was measured in units called roentgens. Normal atmospheric level is about 12 millionths of a roentgen. General Antochkin is shocked by what he finds. Even at that altitude, just a half hour of exposure could be lethal. The strong current of radioactive hot air streaming up from the reactor makes it impossible to get closer. They will have to improvise some way of carrying out their mission. Gigantic ballet begins. Top pilots are being rushed back from the Afghan front to fly helicopters carrying soldiers who will toss 175-pound sandbags into the blaze with their bare hands. They hope to smother the fire by filling the reactor with tons of sand and boric acid, which neutralizes radiation. The first day, 110 sorties. The next, 300. The radiation level above the reactor is over 3,500 roentgens, almost 9 times the lethal dose. Some of the pilots make up to 33 flights in a single day. Since the crisis began, radiation victims have been sent to Moscow's Hospital No. 6. It has the country's only service that specializes in acute radiation sickness and illnesses linked to massive doses of radiation exposure. The initial symptoms of radiation sickness, vomiting, nausea, and diarrhea, are followed by a latency period. It's only later that much more fatal symptoms appear, such as deterioration of bone marrow and burns that eat flesh down to the bone. For 15 years, only these first victims will be acknowledged by the authorities. But many more will confront the devastating consequences of radiation exposure, because the massive battle to contain the catastrophe at Chernobyl has only just begun. 1 week after the explosion at Chernobyl, a massive evacuation is finally underway. The close-by town of Pripyat and the larger city of Chernobyl, roughly 4 miles from the plant, are completely evacuated. So are all the villages within a 19-mile radius. 130,000 people are moved, many of whom have already been dangerously contaminated. An 1,150 square mile area along the border of Ukraine and Belarus is abruptly evacuated and isolated from the rest of the world. In Chernobyl, the level of radioactivity continues to climb. 6,000 tons of sand and boric acid have filled the hole. But underneath this gigantic plug, 195 tons of nuclear fuel is still burning, giving off incredible heat that is gradually melting the sand. On the surface of the plug, cracks begin to appear. The cement slab below the reactor core is heating up and in danger of cracking. The magma is threatening to seep through. The water the firemen poured during the first hours of the disaster has pooled below the slab. If the radioactive magma makes contact with the water, it could set off a second explosion even more devastating than the first. The country's top experts are called into action. During this operation, 600 pilots are fatally contaminated with radiation. All of them will die. But their efforts only buy a few days. Although it has been covered over, the fire still isn't out. Flying over in helicopters isn't solving the problem. They need to get closer. Go down into the breach. But how? The blueprints of the plant reveal that the active zone can be approached through the cable and pipe tunnels, built out of thick cement. A delegation of technicians from the Kurchatov Institute venture into the labyrinth. It's tough going. Parts of the tunnels have collapsed in the explosion. They pierce through the shell of the fourth reactor with a blowtorch and stick their radioactivity detectors and thermometers in, along with cameras. The result is terrifying. The radiation levels are astronomical, and their worst fears are confirmed. The white-hot magma has cracked the cement slab and seeped into the empty basin. It is now threatening to sink even further. And beneath the reactor lies a huge store of groundwater that supplies the entire country. A new operation is launched, the story of which has never fully been told. A daring attempt to burrow beneath the reactor that will eventually claim many more lives. "17 days after the initial explosion, thousands of miners are summoned to Chernobyl from across the Soviet Union. Their mission? To approach the reactor through what is now the only possible path: underground. In 1 month, 10,000 miners from Russia and the mining regions of the Ukraine are sent down into the tunnel. They're between 20 and 30 years old. Inside the tunnel, which has no ventilation, the temperature hits 120 degrees, and radioactivity is at a minimum of 1 Roentgen per hour. The miners accomplish their mission, but the cooling system is never set up below the reactor. The underground room is finally filled with cement to solidify the structure. The official position is that each miner received 30 to 60 Roentgens, but survivors claim they received up to 5 times that amount. It is estimated that a fourth of these men died before the age of 40. 2,500 lives lost that don't appear in any official statistic. The fire at Chernobyl is now being kept in check, but the breach and tons of highly radioactive rubble lie exposed to the elements. It is urgent to cover the broken structure and clean up the zone. But for that, more men will be needed. Many more men. 7 months after the explosion, the zone has been cleaned up and the sarcophagus completed. 500,000 people, military and civilian, have participated in the operation.